this is an issue called stealthing that I think we need to deal with, or at least be aware of. So check this out. Here we go.
Mary, stealthing is defined as tampering or removing a sexually protective device without consent. Now victims have the power to bring civil lawsuits against their partners. Washington's new stealthing law is paving the way for sexual assault victims to come forward.
I did not consent to unprotected sex, and I felt deeply violated.
Back in February, Mina Hashemi testified before the Senate's legal committee in favor of House Bill 1958. She said she had consented to having protected sex with a man, but was shocked to find out that the condom had been removed without her consent.
I experienced deep anxiety about unwanted pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections. I missed work to see my doctor for testing and had to spend money on Plan B.
Stealthing laws typically involve condoms, but in Washington, the definition of protective devices is broader. It includes condoms, diaphragms, cervical caps, and any other barrier that is meant to deter pregnancy and the spread of disease. Now victims can file civil lawsuits.
Give victims a clear pathway to file a civil suit. The burden of proof is much lower in a civil suit than in a criminal case. And also, the victim doesn't have to depend upon a prosecutor to file the case.
On the House floor, the bill had some pushback from state representatives who argued the bill wasn't fair to men. Attorney Mark Lindquist, who has handled criminal assault cases, tells me this law does not criminalize stealthing, but he said it is a step forward for victims.
In addition to making the process of filing a civil suit more clear, the bill also sends a message that if you do this, you could be held civilly liable.
And those who testified said that this new law gives victims more resources. And under this new law, perpetrators could pay up to $5,000 in damages per offense. We're now reporting in Seattle, Karina Vargas, KOMO News.
Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to put this guy on you guys' agenda, on your, on your desk so that you are aware of it. It's a question of stealthing, right? And what it can involve and what can happen if it is deemed by somebody that this is something you may be guilty of, you may have committed an act against. I already see some questions coming through that I think are important. Passport OG says, what if she lies about being on birth control? Okay. Right. Hitflix says, but don't they have to prove they're victims first? MD says this is absolutely egregious. Donnie says I've had to rip one me in 15 years. Okay, if I misread that. All right. Somebody says wow. Dead said ask a critical question. What if the couple's married? Interesting. Right. So what I'm saying with this is we have to be careful. Officer Faulkner says I see the fallacy in it already. Yeah. Right, we have to be careful because what these do is this provides another set of powers to those who can use them in nefarious ways, right? But I actually talked about this in the last couple of years a couple of times, and this is a piece that I think relates to this that I wrote a while back on the blog. So if you go to the blog where did it go? There we go. If you go to newblackmasculinities.wordpress.com, you will find the Black Male Political Agenda. You will also find a series of other pieces that I've written over the years. And this one is entitled, Should Sperm Theft Be Considered a Form of Rape or some type of sexual assault? And this deals with the question of what happens when men are exploited in terms of sperm. So this is very short. This one's only about 3 paragraphs. But I said, I was listening to a video where brother was talking about his girl getting him drunk and having sex with him for the express purpose of getting pregnant, even though they discussed it beforehand. And he told her very explicitly that he wasn't interested in being a father. You believe this is a form of coerced rape in that regard. She manipulatively used alcohol while misrepresenting her status, pretending to be drunk. The question is sperm jacking, spurgling, motherhood by theft, or sperm theft, as it's referred to in Israel, a form of rape? Many of the articles I found about this discussed it, but it didn't classify it as such. and stressed the difficulty in proving it, even if it were. If anything, they classified it in terms of whether or not a man can be held liable for child support, which is a valid question, but not whether or not the violation of trust and the use of his coerced sperm to produce a pregnancy was a violation of him in any way. In other accounts, some women have secured sperm through oral sex and kept it to impregnate themselves, or secured it by fishing recently used condoms, out of trash cans, so on and so forth, or even through coercive means such as sleep grape or use of drugs and alcohol. On moral terms, I think it's a violation, and I believe the use of it produces a pregnancy, and believe the use of it to produce a pregnancy should be classified as a form of something on par with grape, but it might require new language, just as made to penetrate had to be created to account for experiences of sexual violation that were previously ignored, particularly in regard to men. Producing a pregnancy from a man's coerced sperm should have a new classification. I said in the last paragraph, in the meantime, please stay in as much control as possible regarding your body and your sperm. As it stands, relatively speaking, few care, and by that I include the law, about what happens to you in contrast to women's violations. Protect yourselves, take nothing too lightly, maintain your faculties at all times. After all, sperm is something that can be produced well into old age. Be careful around those who may have designs on it at your expense. You're not required to give sperm because a woman is adamant about wanting it or threatens to withhold sex if you don't, tries to get you high or drunk, or misrepresents her use of contraceptives or lack thereof. This goes to what Passport OG was asking about a moment ago. Be careful, stay vigilant. In this economy, you have no idea how many hustles people are running to secure resources. So, what I'm pointing out here is this whole question that we're seeing being brought up about stealthing is specifically, as one of the lawyers kind of referred to in the news clip we just saw, it's targeted at men. But if you really want to talk about violations that could take place during sex, they're not limited to women. Women are not the only ones that can be violated or be made vulnerable. There are examples, and I just gave you a few, how men can be violated. And that's just in terms of sperm. I wasn't talking about the act of sex itself, right? Men can be violated in all kinds of ways. So can women. Women can be vulnerable. Men can be vulnerable. But for some reason, by the time it makes it to policy, it's only framed around protecting women. But the other side to this that few people want to admit to is that even though these policies are worded around protecting women, they're also giving power to those who can exploit the verbiage, the rhetoric, can exploit even the letter of the policy to use in a variety of ways, simply for whatever reason she wants. Whether it's vengeance, whether it's contempt, whether she's embarrassed the next day and doesn't feel good about the event she had with a gentleman last night, or simply because she changed her mind. What protections are in place for men? And there are very few. But more than that, what acknowledgement is there on how men can be vulnerable during sex? What kinds of situations are brought to bear? What kinds of policies can we talk about to protect men in vulnerable situations? I mean, we've seen cases where whether it's underage men and older women to situations where rape is involved, where young men are, violated. And if there is a pregnancy that's produced out of it, he may be responsible for child support. Now, imagine this. We've heard over the decades about whether or not abortion should be used in terms of a woman being violated, so on and so forth. How many times have you heard it discussed that if a man is raped and there's a child produced out of this, whether or not he should be able to abstain from involvement in the pregnancy, whether he should have any word whatsoever, any say whatsoever about whether or not this child should be able to even live, even be birthed? Does he have any say at all? No, not really. But on top of all of that, shout out to KMK and the Cash, I appreciate that. Shout out in regard to all of that, he may be on the hook for child support for a child he didn't even want. And the example I gave you in the written piece, the gentleman I was speaking to, his girl got him drunk on purpose. I've heard that story a lot. Got him drunk, got him high, right? Tried to pull the condom off in the middle of it. There's all kinds of things. Don't get me to asking these fellas in the comments how many different ways have they experienced a woman who wanted to have sex without a condom, without any kind of protection, or simply said, you don't need to wear it, I'm on the pill. How many times have you heard that one? You're putting your next 18 years at least, and of course your finances, all on her word. What happens if she just really wants to have a baby at that point? And we act like this is not a natural thing. Men have a desire to reproduce. It's in our DNA. We want to have sex. It's there before we even know what sex is. But we act like that's not the case for women. That women don't want to reproduce? Are you serious? We act this way. We act like women are just kind of walking around as these innocent snowflakes and men are just all, virtually rapists that just are looking for a wet hole. And that's the end of the dynamic. But don't get it twisted. The push for a woman to want to have a child, the push for a woman to want to reproduce and to do so in all kinds of ways. Shout out to BGS for the support. Thank you. We act like that's not a factor in human nature. That women won't become predatory and exploitive to have a child. We act like that doesn't happen. The only time it happens is when men are violating women. See, the difference is, I admit there are men that do that. I'm not arguing that there haven't been. But what I am arguing is you can't leave out 50% of the human experience simply because it's inconvenient for your politics. It doesn't work. Women have been lying about reproduction, have been lying about how to get pregnant, what to get pregnant with, who to get pregnant by for millennia. For the beginning of human existence. This is going on. This is not new. This has never been new. Shout out to Logic Before Emotion. Peace. Appreciate that donation. Thank you. This is not new. But we don't protect men. We don't acknowledge that this even happens. And we act like it can't. Shout out to Expansion Wiring on PayPal. Appreciate that. We act like this doesn't happen. And it's about time that we become far more vocal about it. Because at the end of the day, if you can arbitrarily be made to pay for a pregnancy you didn't even want, after being drugged, drunk, lied to about, birth control, any of those things. You know what we do though? Instead of actually talking about policy that we can use or push for to advocate for us, what we do is we turn around and we say, well, he was stupid. He let himself get high. He got drunk. He should have put a strap on. We're good at that. And I'm not in disagreement that we have to be responsible for our own genetic material. But let's not pretend that there aren't situations where we can't be manipulated. And if we can be manipulated, should there be protections against that manipulation? Should there be legal protections? Should there be policy-based protection? Should there be punishments? Right? This is what stealthing is. Stealthing is a punishment. And the idea behind it mostly is that, a man takes a condom off or doesn't put one on, doesn't add protection, just decides to do what he wants to do against her will. But there's no conversation about whether or not that happens the other way. Something as simple as, oh, I'm on the pill. Don't worry about it. That's a form of manipulation if she's lying. So you want to critique and punish each other about whether or not we were responsible? Fine. We can do that all day. My question is, after that, what else are we going to do? Are we just going to leave it at personal responsibility? Sounds good. Sounds real good. But there are a lot of circumstances where it needs to be more in place. Right? It needs to be more in place. If you take the case I brought up earlier about the underage boy, there was a 13-year-old man dealing with a 30-year-old woman. She wanted to have sex, and really, she wanted a baby. She got pregnant, and then she turned around and hit him for child support and got it. Right? But what I'm bringing up here is, in what way in the world is an underage young man prepared to deal with a grown woman that is on the hunt for a pregnancy? There are grown men that ain't ready for that onslaught. There are some men that are not ready for a naked woman who is aggressive and wants to have sex. She's not necessarily going to walk up and tell you she wants a baby, but if that's what she wants, let's not pretend that this doesn't happen. This is why we actually have to become very adamant about policy. There needs to be protections. And the reason you call for protections in a civilized society in regard to policy is because you can't account for every variation on a theme. Because if we just say men need to be responsible, wear a condom, sounds great. Great. We can all shake hands on it, give each other a pound. We agree. Peace. There are a million different circumstances where there's greater protection that needs to be brought to bear for a variety of reasons. The underage boy I just mentioned a second ago is just one of them. He's not ready. He's not prepared for that. What happens if you sleep? What happens if you've been drugged? What happens if you're drunk? Oh, those things only happen to women. Okay. There's a lot of men right now that are paying child support on kids they never wanted, and even may have said out loud that they didn't want before the act took place. There's a lot of that going on. But the other twist to it that we know about, and we talk about this only when we tend to talk about DNA, is whether or not men are dealing with kids they're paying child support for or taking care of that they think are theirs. And because DNA testing from birth is not mandatory, we're down to using techniques like, well, I think that's my nose. Well, the kid does kind of have my skin tone. I guess. And often, if you find out the child is not yours, you're 15 years deep in it. How cold you got to be to walk away from a kid you've been raising for years. And then on top of that, you'll be punished for it, particularly in the Black community. Your own mother and grandmother may curse you out for leaving a family even after you've been lied to about the parentage of the children you've been raising. You will be socially punished in your own families and in your own communities for leaving a situation where you were manipulated by a woman who knew at the very least there was a possibility that the child wasn't yours, but refused to tell you or the children. We're going to talk about stealthing then? We're going to talk about manipulation then? So there are a lot of ways men are vulnerable to sex. The act, the implications of it, the results of it. There's a lot of different ways. But none of those ways really provide any serious punishment to women that manipulate and exploit the situation for their own benefit. And I want there to be. So again, when we talk about policy, when we talk about what our political interests are you going to be willing to speak up? Are you going to have the balls to lay it on the line and say, no, there's a series of things we need to have conversations about. And if Trump or Kamala want my vote, these are the things I need. Shout out to Dead Set. He says, I say leave all those heifers behind. Good riddance. Right. But you got to get to a certain point in your life when you're ready to walk away entirely. You do. It takes a lot of discipline, and often it takes a lot of fucking tragedy and trauma before you're just ready to say, all right, I'm done. I can't tell you, even the first year freshmen that I meet, young Black males who are they desire the white picket fence, wife and kids so bad. And I know, because I was one of them. I know that feeling, right? You try to become more than the stereotype of what you've been told Black men were, but really what you want deep down is a loving family. And we are willing to put ourselves in all kinds of situations in hopes of finding that. But we are often not prepared, and the law is definitely not prepared to deal with how many women are willing to exploit men's desire for family. And that's so it's difficult to ask a young man or somebody who has gotten his life together specifically to have a family to prepare himself for how manipulative people can be to use that desire he has against them. It's difficult. Usually the men that I see that are prepared to deal with it have been through some shit. A lot of it. Ed said being one of them. He didn't just wake up, wasn't just born with that perspective. He went through a lot of pain that brought him to this point where he can actually see the world the way he does. And that's the case for most of us. So in the interim, we need to have policy. In the interim, we need to have protections. And it is not a problem, or shouldn't be, in our own mind to seek it out, to require it of anyone that requires our votes.